Hello, Explearners. Hello. Welcome to our second live stream. As you know, MD and Greg are here.
We're here.
So today's topic is authentic communication. How can you communicate authentically? So we're going to unpack this a little bit. And
we forgot to talk about the tea we're drinking.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm actually having coffee.
You're having coffee?
What are you having?
I'm having a lovely chamomile tea.
Ooh.
Yeah, with a little bit of residue of lemongrass from the day before.
It's a blend.
It's a blend.
It's a blend.
We'll call it a blend.
Yes.
Yeah. It was an accidental blend. But it's actually quite nice. Chamomile and lemongrass.
That actually makes sense. I mean, lemongrass pairs really well. Remember when we were in Cambodia and I was mixing like the jasmine tea with lemongrass?
Yeah.
It was really good. Pro tip, if you have access to both jasmine green tea and lemongrass, you can mix the two together and it is just such a wonderful combination.
Lemongrass goes well with a lot of things.
Yeah, it really is. And it's also caffeine free, which is nice.
But I interrupted you.
Anyway,
sorry,
let's not
I just
digress.
had to make sure we got that out of the way.
So we have a few questions that got sent to us, so we can share those on here and talk about them and answer them as best we can. And for any of you who are joining us live, who are also doing the live interactive chat, because I know some of you are on here but are not chatting with us, so to speak, feel free to just, chime in, ask your questions, make your comments, and we're going to leave this up so that you can join us later on after we end the live. Okay, excellent.
Great.
So yes, authenticity in communication, such a big topic. It really is. It's so vague in a way. It's such a suitcase term.
It is. And it's also sort of hard to pin down. I think it's one of those aspects of communication that we're not necessarily even aware of, right? Because the period of true authenticity, as I like to think it, is when you're a baby.
Right. I was about to say.
Yeah. When you're an infant, you're purely authentic because there's no concern about how the rest of the world sees you, how you want to portray yourself, that whole sort of social pressure issue that comes as you get older.
Yeah. And I think obviously it's tied to our ego. And I think so, our authenticity, it's us, right? We're supposed to be us. Us is the ego that we have. At least I'm thinking about the Greek word, the etymology of that word, ego, right? And so,
which is kind of like your personality.
Yeah, I think it's your identity, right?
Your identity.
But as we know, we can have multiple identities, and not in a disorderly way. I mean, we're not talking about the medical terminology of disordered thought or anything. But in terms of, the roles you play, even if we go just pare it down to the simple sort of way of understanding, like you can be a mother, you can be a sister, you can be a daughter, you can be a friend, you can be a teacher, you can, all these different
those are all
things.
Identities.
These are all identities. And you can be authentically each one of those. But now when you are a teacher in your truest, most authentic way, you're not necessarily going to be that same version of yourself when you are a sister.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
That makes sense.
So, I sort of think of it that way in terms of like the different roles that we have.
Yeah. And if we think about sort of how authenticity manifests in those roles, I would imagine that the ones where you're more comfortable in, you're more likely to be authentic.
Yeah.
And the roles where you're less comfortable in, you're less likely to be authentic.
100%.
Not that it's a deliberate decision, but that simply your comfort enables you to express your authentic self with greater ease than, being in a sort of uncomfortable role where you are less confident about your ability to sort of fulfill the expectations of that role. And because of that, you might project a version of yourself that doesn't come across as authentic.
Right. And how do you feel like, let's say the person is projecting that version of themselves that's not necessarily aligned with their authenticity. Do you think they feel it, or do you think the other people feel it? Who picks up on it? Because in my sort of research and just experience, it's usually the person within themselves feel it. Like it's the inner turmoil, the cognitive dissonance we have of being something not really true to ourselves.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's probably a spectrum.
Yeah, of course.
Right, as with most things.
Right.
And I think it's a little bit related to what we were talking about last week in terms of your
intrapersonal communication.
Intrapersonal communication, right? Your ability to hear that inner voice. And I think people who are attuned to their inner voice are more aware when they're being less authentic.
Yes, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Whereas the people who aren't as used to listening to that inner voice might not realize that they're not being authentic.
Yeah.
But regardless of whether you're aware of it or not, your body, I think, can divulge sort of hints that you're not being authentic, right? Part of you, whether you're cognizant of it or not, knows that it's not being authentic.
Yeah.
And because of that, you might express certain, characteristics or cues that show to the listener, to the audience, that this person is not being authentic. And the reason that matters is because if the audience doesn't believe you're being authentic, then it sort of discredits what you're saying, right? And I think the audience loses a little bit of trust in what you're saying.
And credibility.
Credibility, yeah, that's really the word. It's your credibility, because the audience starts to wonder. And the audience can be one person or many people, but they start to wonder, is this person qualified to say what they're saying?
Right.
And then it gets even worse, because then the person speaking starts to read the audience and their skepticism.
Yes.
And so then they start freaking out a little more. And it creates this crazy negative feedback loop where the audience is getting more and more skeptical. Yeah. The speaker's getting more and more sort of aware of that and frustrated
and
self-conscious.
Yeah, and then the insecurity levels go up, and then it's just
it sort of compounds on itself.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Which is to say then, having the inner monologue and the sort of the time to reflect and think about who you are and what you want and what version of yourself you're portraying in different scenarios and situations, and to the participants, is really important to do the work ahead of time, so that you're not necessarily in a situation where you suddenly feel like you are, being insecure or discredited or whatever it is that starts building up that insecurity, right?
So what you're saying is basically if you're stepping into a role that is sort of less natural for you, that you need to do sufficient preparation for that role. Is that what you're getting at?
Definitely. I mean, I think I was saying it more in like a general sense in terms of like doing the intrapersonal communication work, but definitely I think that's really good advice which brings me to a question that we got. When you're not familiar with the topic or a role, you have to do the work, obviously, and then make sure that you understand how you might react to the situation or the role, or how you think you should behave in it, right? And I mean, I did a lot of research with the avatar concept.
Yeah.
Well, you can find this information on the blogs, and we'll do a separate talk about that.
Cool.
I think.
It's cool. Yeah.
It's really cool.
You definitely need to share it with them so much.
It's so important. This is work that we do with our private clients and also students. And we're working it into our web courses as well. So it's pretty exciting. But essentially, it does tap into the idea that we have different roles, and it ties into the psychological sort of understanding of the ought self. And it's really interesting, but I'm not going to digress. I do want to get to one of the questions, which is, well, here, this one's in the middle, but we can ask it. So Alberto is asking us about imposter syndrome. And if it relates to communication, authentic communication.
Right.
And the reason I'm starting with this is because I think you set it up pretty nicely with, when you're in an unfamiliar role or unfamiliar territory, so to speak, you're going to feel a little bit like an imposter, right? It happens
feeling well
to everyone. And actually they show that PhD students feel this the first, I think, year or two. They feel this really strong sense of imposter syndrome. Like, what am I doing here? I mean, look at those people, look at me, like they deserve to be here. All these things where it's the negative self-talk again, which we don't like.
Yeah, can you just explain imposter syndrome a little bit?
So in a nutshell, it's the idea that you are a fraud. You are an imposter, and someone is going to find you out. So I think most of the time it comes in these uncertain social settings or these really unfamiliar sort of situations where you might be new to the job or you got recently promoted, right? All these amazing things that you should be super happy about and just, relishing in the fact that you were promoted, you got accepted to the program, you're starting a new job, right? But instead, that negative self-talk is like, no, hold up, you're an imposter.
Right, like you don't deserve to be there.
Exactly.
Or you're not qualified to be there.
Exactly, and it's this fear that we have. And it's so funny because, we listen to a lot of podcasts and we read books, and a lot of these high-performing, high-achieving people out there, these just superstars that, we think of as that way, talk about having imposter syndrome.
It's crazy.
And the fact that it doesn't go away.
Because when I think about, my role models and people that I admire, you kind of assume they've got life figured out.
Right,
that
they're like set.
Whatever they're doing, they've mastered it.
Totally.
And that they're, the ultimate sort of paragon of confidence. But you're right. I mean, in multiple occasions, we've heard them say things like, even now, even at the pinnacle of their success, they still feel like they don't belong there, that they don't deserve to have the sort of level of success that they've achieved.
Right. And the idea that someone is going to find out that they're a fraud, which is obviously not the case. Right.
Yeah. So it's sort of prevalent. It persists across the entire spectrum of existence.
Totally. But, I think the way we should think about it, and Alberto, I think that, thank you, first of all, for asking this question, for sending it in. It definitely relates to authentic communication. I think
we love getting questions.
Yes. I think that, now I forget what I was going to say, but that's okay.
Oh, sorry.
I was talking about in authentic communication and imposter syndrome, but I'm trying to think, okay, you say something.
Yeah. Well, I have some thoughts on it. I mean, I've definitely experienced it myself.
I remember now. Go ahead. You share first.
Yeah. I mean, basically my experiences with imposter syndrome, my most poignant experiences, and they're relatively recent.
Okay.
The first was going into business school.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And the second was in my last job. So going into business school, I was coming from a nonprofit background. So for me, going to business school was a very intimidating prospect.
Yeah.
Right. The people around me were all, high-performing finance types, consultants, making a lot more money than I was, and with a lot more exposure to what we think of as the real world.
Yeah.
Right. The tough Wall Street veterans and all this.
Right.
That I was totally sort of disconnected from. And so when I got there, and it also didn't help that I could barely do sort of the level of math that was required for these courses. So I was.
But also you were coming from abroad, right? You were working abroad at the time.
So there was also a different cultural
context.
So I was working in China at the time, and the business school was in Philadelphia in the US. And so, there were all these
different things
converging factors that made me feel really uncomfortable. And so when I got there and I saw these people around me, I was like, oh, wow. I mean, they're all so accomplished, and what am I doing here? I'm going to totally fail.
Oh.
And it took about a year, I think, for me to sort of realize that these people are no different than I am, and that they have their own struggles as well. And a lot of them who I thought were most deserving to be there also felt it for entirely separate reasons.
Exactly.
So that was a big eye opener.
Yeah.
And then, so that's sort of an example of going into a new community, one where you're not sure you belong. And then the second one was when I got my job after business school, was in a more senior role than I'd ever had.
Right.
And so in that case, I didn't feel qualified for that role. I felt that within the first week or two of assuming the role, that I'd be called out, that it would turn out, I wasn't able to do what I was supposed to do, what, my job description said. And so that was pretty intimidating. And particularly when I met external parties outside the company, they're like, oh, this is your role. So you must be, capable of X, Y, and Z. And in my head, I'm like, no, I'm not capable of that.
I just got here. No.
I just got here. I'm not even sure what that is. But anyways, that was another situation where I definitely felt it for a different reason. This wasn't so much me versus a community. It was more so me versus this idea of what I should be.
Absolutely. So it's the illusion. It's the perceived sort of understanding. What we think the people there are like, the job is like, how we're supposed to be, just all these things that aren't actually necessarily true. And the thing that I just remembered that I just forgotten was what I think the greatest way of looking at imposter syndrome is not to treat it as a bad thing, but instead to embrace it and to just realize that, well, if we're feeling like an imposter, if we're struggling with imposter syndrome, then that just means that we're taking risks. And taking risks is a sign of growth. It's a way of getting out of your comfort zone. And we talk about getting out of your comfort zone a lot here on Explearning, because it's really the only way. I would say it's the only way, at least most of the time. It's the only way of really growing, just stepping out of your comfort zone.
We could say it's a great way.
It's a really great way.
Yeah,
it really is. You have to feel a little bit of that discomfort, and humans seek out. Humans avoid discomfort. Like, we do not like discomfort. And there's things like taking the cold showers and the ice baths and all of this, like seeking out discomfort just to, prove a point. But I think it's like to build up the resistance. But we just don't we're inherently predisposed to avoiding discomfort as much as we can, as best we can.
Totally. Yeah. That's this sort of human instinct, right? Going outside your comfort zone is potentially putting yourself at risk.
Right.
And so if your goal as a caveman or cavewoman is survival, going outside your comfort zone is putting that survival at risk. So we're sort of hardwired in our hardware to not go out of our comfort zone.
Beyond the limits of what's considered, beyond the parameters of what's safe.
Yeah. And to get a little meta here, even these lives that we're doing right now, right? This was us stepping outside our comfort zone.
Absolutely.
Right? Like,
definitely.
Neither of us had, I certainly hadn't done lives. You had some live experience with your news anchoring.
Yeah, but it's always different. It's always different. And, we're just starting out with this, right? We're experimenting, and we just want it to get better and better and better. And so definitely, I think I absolutely agree with you. We're out of our comfort zones right now, you guys.
But it's funny, as soon as you dive in,
to
use the cold water metaphor, you realize the
water's... Do you want to explain it?
Yeah. The water's not as cold as you think. And so, yes, the cold water metaphor, the reason I'm going to give it a little airtime here is because I think it's very relevant to this. And it's relevant because, if the goal is to challenge yourself by stepping outside your comfort zone, what are some ways to do that as baby steps toward something bigger?
Right.
The biggest ways to get outside your comfort zone, to sort of show where the end game is, in my view, is social comfort zones.
Definitely.
Right? I think the hardest comfort zones to exit are your social comfort zones.
Yes.
So a gateway way to challenge yourself to get outside your comfort zone is actually much more personal, right? So personal, physical comfort zones. I find that those are things where if you fail, you're the only person who knows they failed, right? Whereas in the social context, if you screw up, everyone sees that you screw up.
It's the embarrassment that you feel like you'll face, or the rejection.
The rejection, that's a big part.
Yeah.
Whereas when you do these little things, these little personal challenges that are physical, you're the only one keeping track.
Right.
And so the cold water one is where essentially you find a really cold pool.
Could be an ice bath.
But more practically for most of us, you just have a shower, and hopefully a shower gets pretty cold. Right. Actually, what I've realized, it doesn't matter how cold it gets. As long as it's colder than comfortable, it works. So anyways, the task is in the morning, it can be whenever, but I like to do in the morning,
to wake you up, right? It's like,
turn on your shower on its coldest setting. Don't put any heat, and get in. And you don't have to get in for very long. It can just be a couple minutes, and then get back out. And you experience this incredible
discomfort.
Well, during the time, it's
You're
discomfort.
Numb. You're numb.
You're numb.
Yeah.
The greatest discomfort, ironically, is right before you get in the water. So the greatest discomfort is the anticipation of what's going to happen. And so the challenge is just getting over that sort of that sort of fear of what's going to happen, doing it. And then once you get in the water, it's uncomfortable, but it's actually not that bad, right?
It's not as bad as you thought.
Your skin immediately adjusts. And then after you do it, you experience this sense of euphoria.
Right.
That's incredible. I equate it to sort of being reborn. It's just any mood that you're in prior to that is totally obliterated, because when you step out, you're fresh and ready to tackle the day. And it's based in a lot of really interesting science. There's a guy named Wim Hof.
Wim Hof, I was about to say, I think the first time I heard about this as a thing was you told me about Wim Hof.
Yeah, who is Tim Ferriss, as most things are. But Wim Hof, you should definitely look him up, and his cold water treatment. It's an incredible process. I haven't done it recently, but I went through about a year or two.
No, it was more
of
than that. You did
it
for
might have been
like
2 years.
2 years
Of this.
And we're talking about in the dead of winter. Like this was.
Exactly.
I mean, it was already cold outside. It was also cold.
Yeah. No, I actually, give you a little peek into my head. I actually took out a meat thermometer and would measure the water.
And then the Excel chart that you had.
And I keep an Excel chart of the temperatures from day to day, just to sort of plot my reaction to the water versus the actual temperature of the water.
So if our building wanted to know the temperature of the water, you'd have all the data,
I have that data
for 2 years to back it up.
But what I learned from all that fastidious data tracking.
What's the takeaway?
Well, there's a couple takeaways, but one is that it doesn't matter how cold the water is, right? The fact that the water is uncomfortable is enough.
Okay.
Whether it's super cold or just a bit cold.
Yeah.
The fear of getting into it is the same.
That's the thing. It's the fear. It's future tripping. It's the fear of feeling discomfort sometime in the future.
And more so, it's the fact that the fear is disproportionate to what's actually happening.
Yes.
Right? So I had this incredible fear of getting into the water when it was 40 degrees Fahrenheit, but I had that same intensity of fear when it was 65 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
Right? And the reality is, in both contexts, you're going to be fine once you get in.
Right.
And 40 is pushing it. By 40, it's a little.
It's a little.
But the point is, that same thing can be applied in a social context.
Definitely.
Right? It's the fear of getting up to give a speech, the fear of going on and doing a live broadcast,
or talking to someone that you meet in a networking event or live broadcast.
Right. That prevents you from doing it. It's paralyzing.
Yeah.
But once you do it, you realize, oh, this is actually achievable. And I think that comes back to this imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
It's that you don't feel qualified to do something, that you're not physically prepared, you're not mentally prepared, you're not socially prepared to do something that's preventing you. It's that imposter syndrome that's standing between you and greatness, frankly.
Definitely. Or just reaching your potential, or just being a better version of yourself, right? Because everyone defines success differently, and everyone has different levels of what they want to achieve. Yeah. I think we have a question over there. Or something.
Oh, great. Hello. I'm so happy. They're just mentioning that they're watching live with us.
Oh, good. Welcome. So happy you could join us.
Yeah.
So just to make sure everyone's up to speed, we're talking about authentic communication, what that means, how to be authentic. We just recently wrapped up a little bit about talking about imposter syndrome. And then Greg shared experience with sort of putting yourself in uncomfortable situations and taking little baby steps. So doing things like taking cold showers, and there's a variety of different ways you can take these baby steps. But it's also the idea that this can help you when you're in social settings where you feel this huge sense of insecurity, or the imposter syndrome starts bubbling up inside you. What do you do? And it's not bad to have these feelings. just so we can reiterate. It's actually a good thing. It means that you're taking risks and you're getting outside of the comfort zone.
Yeah.
So I love thinking of it that way. I really do.
Yeah, I do too. And,
Yeah.
and once you start to challenge yourself in this way, it becomes easier to do it in other ways too.
Definitely. And then you just keep raising the bar. You keep getting further and further outside of your comfort zone.
And I think it's really tied to what you were, and this is, of course, why I think you did a great job in bringing it up. It's very tied to that sense of authenticity, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Because by definition, if you're experiencing this sense of being an imposter, that's the same thing as saying, I don't feel authentic.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And there's certain aspects of us that we know are authentic, and we can be authentic in that way very easily.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge is, can we be authentic in ways that are new to us?
Very good question. I think we got something like that here.
Yeah.
Well, Perry asks, does your authenticity change over time?
Perfect. Yeah.
A great question, Perry. Seriously.
Yeah. I mean, that's spot on.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
I think it does. I think if you're committed to, let me put it this way, if you're the type of person who seeks out personal growth, professional development, however you want to, self-improvement, whatever you want to call it, I think that, you do get outside of that comfort zone. And then your definition of authentic is sort of shifting. It's growing. It's evolving. So, for example, if you're, in a coding position and your identity is as a coder, so you develop software, you do all the things that coders do and build websites, apps, and then you get promoted to a very different role, which puts you in front of people more and more. So you're interacting with people. You might not feel comfortable, but then all of a sudden you start going through the motions. You start believing that you can. You think not too much about the imposter syndrome. And then that becomes your authentic self. So you move from this very drastically different role of, maybe being at a computer, more insulated, not interacting with people too much, right? As a typical developer might experience.
Mm-hmm.
But then you get, you're in a different job and suddenly you're in this environment where you're talking a lot to people, you're interfacing with management, you're doing all these things that previously you would have been terrified of. So I think your authenticity definitely shifts over time if you want it to, and if you embrace the different roles that you can do and the different hats you can wear.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I completely agree. And I think of authenticity sort of in the framework of a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset.
Yes.
Right.
Which is a concept brought up by Carol Dweck, a psychologist at Stanford, I believe. Great TED Talk about the growth mindset. And she has a great book too, Mindset.
Right. And so the idea there is a fixed mindset says you're born with certain skills and the only thing you can do is, sort of.
You're just stuck that way.
You're stuck with those skills and you can do as best as you can within those skills. You can't really change yourself as a person. The growth mindset is by contrast, argues that your skills are actually can be acquired and you can become sort of a new sort of improved person by exploring new skills.
Yeah.
And I think with authenticity, it's the same way, right? Where as long as you're being honest about your expertise, your sort of capabilities throughout the process of assuming a new identity, you can be authentic throughout the entire process, right? So let's take the example of my job, right? I didn't feel authentically like my role suggested I should be when I started that job. But what helped me sort of assume that in a smooth way was being very upfront about that. Not saying I don't feel qualified for this job, but instead saying, this is something I don't have a lot of experience with. Could you help me understand this aspect, A-B, right? Asking lots of questions, being very humble.
Yes.
And what I've learned is that, you're never really an expert at anything.
Nobody's
right?
really an expert.
So
I don't believe
authenticity doesn't sort of suggest your level of expertise, really. To me, authenticity is much more about being humble, about being true to how you feel about something, to your experience with something, and being transparent with your audience, with the people you're speaking with, about your perspective on it, right? Your
I love
status
it.
on that.
Yeah, I think transparency is huge. I mean, I think it's such an important aspect of communicating authentically, and just owning up to the fact that you might need to learn things first, right?
Yeah.
There's a learning curve associated with any new job, role, situation, anything. And that's the beauty of being a human, I think.
Yeah.
Because we have this, innate sense of wanting to explore and learn and explorn.
Exactly.
Right.
I mean, that's really, you make a point. I think that sort of process and challenging yourself is built into the ethos of Explearning, right?
Definitely.
The process of exploration really is that. And sort of on that topic, we had a great question from Anmol here, who was asking, do we have any other examples sort of beyond cold showers?
Oh, yeah.
Ways to sort of challenge ourselves to sort of overcome that fear?
Let's see. So I think this can also do with maybe some activity, like let's say hiking.
Yep.
I mean, we love to hike, so I can give that example. Anmol. Maybe, instead of going
a little boot packing.
I can share that one. Should we share that one?
It's up to you.
So Gregory and I were on a ski trip a couple years ago, and I hadn't skied in a while. So, I mean, I grew up skiing, but I was a bit rusty because I was abroad and didn't really have access to slopes. And then we went on a ski trip, and Greg says, do you want to go up to that part of the mountain, which was completely roped off? There were no chairlifts there. And I was like, how are we going to get there? Like, it didn't even occur to me that you could boot pack, even though in college we had a lot of friends doing that, you included. Anyway, so he's like, well, we're just going to, put our skis on and carry them up.
We take your skis off.
Take your skis off.
Put them over your shoulder.
Right. And you have all the gear on. You have your poles. You have these heavy ski boots. I mean, we're in the tundra, so we have layers and layers of clothing. Anyway, I'm not going to digress here, but I did it. I was absolutely terrified of doing it because you're, on this line going up the mountain, and I literally had to be right behind you. Otherwise, I was going to get lost, and I didn't have a cell phone on me, or it didn't work because we were in Japan. Anyway, I did it, and it was terrifying, but then I felt really good about it because I got way out of my comfort zone. I mean, if my comfort zone was here for doing anything remotely associated with that, I was here by the end of it.
And I have
it's doing stuff like that. It's doing stuff that you wouldn't, maybe not put yourself in danger. I didn't feel like I was endangered because I had Gregory with me and I put trust in him. So, and I also, put trust in myself. I was like, I grew up skiing. I could do this. I work out, blah, blah, blah. So it's the confidence of knowing that you'll be fine, but you still want to do it anyway. You know that doing it is going to get you closer to being outside of your comfort zone. And again, those things translate to other aspects of your life, right? We're talking about skiing here, but it still relates to being in a different, unfamiliar social setting and different situation. What were you going to say?
Yeah, well, I have an interesting perspective on that same story, right? Because from my perspective, when I suggested, let's go do this cool little exciting, sidetrack.
Exciting.
She said, yeah, sounds great. And I didn't realize, it didn't occur to me that she was actually nervous about it. And so—
Not nervous, mortified. Like mortified.
So when we started going up this mountain and the wind was blowing,
icy cold wind,
and then I'm carrying my skis and I'm thinking, oh boy, I'm really having a hard time here. Like, this is actually a little more than I bargained for. I can only imagine what my poor wife is doing behind me. So I sort of put down my skis and turn around to see where she is. I expect her to sort of be in the distance, and she's right on my heels. And, she, in her story, was saying, oh, I did that because I was nervous. From my perspective, it's like, wow, she's a really tough cookie. This is easy for her because she's right on my heels.
Yeah.
So she felt inauthentic, right? That she wasn't qualified to do this.
Oh, I felt completely out of my element.
From my perspective, I didn't sense that inauthenticity. It was the opposite. For me, I saw her as this really confident outdoors person who was doing really well. So I thought that was an interesting sort of example of how
we perceive it differently.
Two people can perceive it differently. The person who feels inauthentic might actually appear quite authentic.
Yes. Just on that note, if you want to know more about there's this great TED Talk by Amy Cuddy. I don't know if it's Cuddy or Cuddy. Anyway, it's Cuddy. I can put it in the description box down below after the live goes up. But anyway, she talks about, so there's this phrase called fake it till you make it. I'm not crazy about that phrase, but I really like her variation on the theme, which is fake it till you become it. Essentially what you have to do is you go through the motions of doing that thing. So like boot packing, and then you start to identify as someone who can do it. Then that becomes part of your authenticity. So sometimes it's just putting yourself in that situation, going through the action, going through the movements and the motions, and then you come out being that thing. Right. So like in your case of doing that job, you went through, you said, okay, I have a lot to learn here, but I'm still capable of it, confident in your abilities. But then you also know that, okay, there's going to be some ramp up time here that we need. But then you come out just knowing it. So go through the motions, fake it till you become it. And then you're not faking it anymore because it is part of your identity. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely an approach. I thought of something else that might be helpful sort of in the line of, so we came up with two examples so far. One was the cold showers, which is sort of this physical challenge.
Yes.
The second one is, something outdoors, right?
Yeah.
Doing something that's
beyond
what you've done before.
What you feel comfortable
doing. Doesn't have to be dangerous.
Yeah, don't do something dangerous.
Don't do something dangerous.
Don't do that.
But, challenge yourself, maybe instead of running 1 mile like you normally do, run 2 miles.
Yeah,
right?
anything that kind of pushes you to a discomfort level.
But I had another idea.
Yeah.
Which is doing stuff for free, right? So it can be doing a favor for someone, or it can be charity work, right? Helping out a soup kitchen, doing things that you don't normally do, that you don't necessarily feel qualified to do, but in doing them, you are doing someone else a favor.
Definitely.
So even if you screw it up, they're still going to be grateful because you're at least trying to help. And so I think that's a great opportunity, right? I've never sort of served food in a catering setting before. So for me to go to a soup kitchen and serve food would actually feel like a challenge to me. I'm nervous. Am I doing this right? Do I know sort of how to do it? Am I sort of following the correct protocol and so forth? But the reality is I'm volunteering my time, and they're going to be appreciative regardless.
Definitely. They're just so happy to help, have people to help. When I was in school, we would go to the one, the Sisters of Charity, the Mother Teresa one that she started. I think it was in the Bronx, and we'd go there, and it was just such a wonderful experience because no matter what you do, they even had my brother who's, I don't know, maybe he was like 3 or 4 at the time, maybe a little bit older. But anyway, he was a little kid. They had him go behind like the stove area. This was supervised, and my parents were there too. And had him like get into the hard to reach spots because he had little tiny hands, just like getting in. So anything can help. And then for school, like I asked people at school to bring in the yogurt cups, and we use them because they use them as cups. So basically the point here is that anything is valuable to them, right? Or to other people.
Right. When you're volunteering
your time, then
it's okay if you screw up, right? It gets you outside your comfort zone, but there's still no risk of sort of that embarrassment or social
faux pas
that might be associated with something more challenging, or when you're getting paid for your time and then the expectations might be more severe.
So I think the bottom line there, like the takeaway with that is like just the perspective.
It's all about perspective.
The perspective.
Yeah. Do
we have something else going on here?
Yeah. Well, Pursuing Peace here was saying that they loved the TED Talk that you mentioned.
Oh yeah, the Amy Cuddy one.
And
it's a really good one.
Just the importance of sort of putting yourself on the spot. And it is scary, but totally worth it, like you're saying.
Totally worth it.
And again, I think the more that you do it, the easier it becomes. It's another one of those muscles. Yeah, it's another one of those muscles that as you train, it becomes stronger.
Yes.
And really, really serves you well.
Absolutely.
Because if you sort of look, at the world as a whole, the people that you're reading about in the news who are achieving great things, that are accomplishing a lot, those typically are the people that are stepping outside their comfort zone. These are the people
Definitely.
that probably are told, no, that's impossible. You can't do that.
What a
You're
ridiculous,
not good enough,
ludicrous thought.
right?
How could you even think
You're
of
not
a
qualified.
product like that?
And they've been told that, and they do it anyways. Yeah. And that takes a lot of strength
and courage.
Yeah.
And just knowing that you're going to have some discomfort with it, like you're going to feel maybe like a fraud in the beginning, but that you have to do it. It is your vocation. It is your mission. You just have to do it.
Yeah.
And you know that, like, it makes me think of that amazing documentary, the National Geographic one, Free Solo, with Alex Honnold.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Some people are calling it basically.
I'm going to put that in the show notes.
The most incredible physical human feat ever accomplished. And this is sort of coming from people who are well-versed in the Olympics and professional athletes and so forth.
So who is Alex Honnold?
Alex Honnold is a free climber, solo climber.
Which means,
so mountain climbing and rock climbing specifically is when you are going up a rock face, but you have a harness, you have cables, and so you're hooked into the mountain. Yeah. So if you fall off, you're going to get caught by the rope.
Right.
And you're not going to fall.
Provided that the rope is strong enough to hold your weight.
Everything's set up properly.
Hopefully, right.
A free climber is someone who goes up that same mountain, but without the ropes, goes up the same cliff face.
All you have is a little bag of chalk,
right?
No water, nothing, and your hands. You just
it's just you and the mountain.
Oh my gosh.
And by no means are we condoning or recommending something like this.
Not unless you're qualified.
It's a good example of someone who has taken themselves out of the comfort zone to an extreme level. And part of the reason I think watching documentaries, inspiring documentaries like that is useful is no matter how hard, whatever it is you have, it's a speech, it's a new job, an interview, no matter how intense and sort of intimidating that is, when you think what these other people who are
like extreme sports,
right? Yeah. What they're facing, it makes it a little more approachable.
Yeah, I think again, it's the perspective. But just to put Alex Honnold a little bit in context, they did a CAT scan of him, and they found that his amygdala, which is where our brain responds to fear, they found that his fear response was really, really high, meaning he needed to do something crazy. And I put that in quotes because for him, it's not crazy, but maybe for your average person, it could be, in order to feel a little bit nervous or scared.
Right.
He had to go
feel
up
that stimulation.
to feel that stimulation. So there's a medical sort of connection with just like the physiology of him. So this is not to say that everyone should do it, but it's a great example of, just getting inspired, right? We want to just inspire ourselves here and do whatever we can to get outside of our own comfort zone.
Yeah. So Pursue and Peas actually mentioned something that's really interesting because I think you'll be able to weigh in on it.
Yeah.
They're feeling some imposter syndrome because they're creating courses.
Oh, okay.
And so I can totally get that. I actually did a very short stint in teaching early on.
Yeah.
But you have much more experience. Have you ever experienced that sense of imposter syndrome when you were creating courses sort of early on in your teaching career?
So I think when I first started like formally teaching, because I was a TA in college for French. So it was more of a one-on-one kind of setting and small groups. But then when I started teaching abroad through my Fulbright program, I was put in front of a group of people who were probably not not that much younger than myself, because I had just graduated from college. And I was told, okay, you're going to teach them now. And I definitely felt like, I mean, I'm basically their age. What am I going to teach them? It was English and communication and public speaking. So all things, that I love. But I definitely felt sort of nervous. And the first, I would say a couple weeks, probably a couple weeks. I mean, this is like 10 or so years ago. I'd go in and be, a little bit nervous and a little bit, feeling like a fraud. But then I just sort of focused on them. I focused on what value can I add to them. So I think the point here is that even if you're feeling that way, if you have something to offer, be it, through a course that you're designing, through physical teaching, showing up to a classroom in that traditional classroom space, doing something online like a webinar or something. Try to get past that discomfort by thinking more so about what you can offer to your audience, to your students, to those people out there, because ultimately that's why you're doing it, I would think, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
it almost goes back to what I was saying, where a way to overcome some of this fear is through like volunteering your time.
Yeah.
In this case, you're not volunteering your time per se.
No, not necessarily.
But it is that same sort of mental framework, which is my goal here is to confer some value to the people that I'm addressing.
Definitely.
And so to the extent that I can even do a little bit of that, I've succeeded.
Right.
Right. And so instead of worrying about the standards that your audience, that your students are going to hold you to, instead think about sort of what you have to offer, what you can offer. And if you can even just get a little bit of that sort of across to your students, that's a win.
Yeah.
And
you're golden.
Yeah. And then it's just a sort of, after that, it's just a sort of step-by-step process of working up toward sort of getting it to the level where you feel really proud and good about it.
Yeah. So I hope that answers your question, pursuing peace.
Yeah.
Let us know if you want us to elaborate a little bit more. Yeah. So just thinking more about them.
Yeah.
Because it's really hard sometimes we're self-conscious, right? We all are. You know, people say, don't care about what other people think, don't care about, yes, but it's hard, right? But we can sort of not focus on that by thinking about, value delivery.
Right.
As opposed to, how am I doing? Is my hair okay? Am I saying the right things? Am I, is my speech loud enough?
Is this as good as this other person?
Right. Comparing, and comparison is the thief of joy. That's what Theodore Roosevelt said.
Oh, that's
right?
interesting.
Yeah. So it's true.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think Anmal has a question, right? Or something. Let's see it.
Yeah. So this is interesting. The bad past emotion comes up before giving self-introduction. That makes me feel nervous. Solution to discard that emotion. That's interesting.
Okay, so there's a really good technique. I think maybe Tim Ferriss is the one who kind of talks about this. We like Tim Ferriss. Anyway, so he talks about doing a recon ahead of time. So reconnaissance, which is basically you put yourself, I'm guessing, is this a speech or an introduction?
Yeah, I think in the context, self-introduction.
Okay, so you're introducing
whether it's
yourself
to an individual or to a group.
Okay, so let's keep it more general. Then self-introduction. So let's say you did that and you flubbed, and now you just start thinking about those things. Like all those emotions are you're flooded with the memories of not doing your best. So the most important thing here is to put yourself in that same situation or as close to it as you can in order to change the memory, or at least to override the memory. So for example, let's say yesterday you did a self-introduction, didn't go so well, it flopped. Okay, that's fine. Now you put yourself again in a similar situation, and you reprogram your brain to think that is not going to happen again. Does that make sense? It's reconning ahead of time. So basically you put yourself in that situation and you expect, okay, that might happen, this might happen, these crazy things might happen, but you go out of your way to change it.
Okay, so what you're saying is, step one is you had that bad experience.
It's a little bit sort of cerebral and abstract. Let's walk through it. Okay.
So step one is you had that bad experience.
You had that experience. Okay.
So step two.
You don't dwell on it, but.
Well, let me just see if I got it.
Okay, go ahead.
Step one is you have the bad experience.
Yes.
Step two is, okay, I had that bad experience. I'm going to recreate it in my head and play it out in a way that would have gone well. Is that what you're saying?
You basically, yeah, exactly. You try not to, you don't dwell on the previous bad experience, because you will have a psychosomatic response, meaning your brain will cause you to feel really nervous, and you'll start shaking, and however you manifest nerves and just feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah.
We all have different ways of doing that. But the point is to detach yourself from that experience. So basically, you're not having the self-introduction be tied to that one awful experience. Instead, you're basically shutting it out and reprogramming it.
Yeah.
You're doing something different so that becomes your new sort of status quo. And maybe it's a little bit different than what Tim Ferriss is talking about, reconning ahead of time, because with his example, I think it's more of like you go to that place and you just familiarize yourself with this setting, which can also be helpful, right?
But again, you're doing this in your head. I think that's right.
Yes and no. It depends.
Or are you saying you're actually going to the place where you can?
Well, that's the thing. You can do both ways. If you do recon ahead of time, you actually have to go into that space.
Interesting.
So if you know where you're going to give your talk or do the self-introduction, try to go into that space. So if it's a classroom, go in there. If it's a venue, try to go there. If not, then you're going to have to do the mental work. So it's yes and no. That's why I said that. But basically, you don't want to attach those feelings with that awful experience. Does that make sense? It's a little bit abstract, I know. But essentially, what you want to do is have a do-over and then associate the more positive memory to that thing. Basically, in a nutshell, what you don't want to do is have that deter you, stop you from doing a self-introduction.
Right.
That's the important thing.
So I think the key here is that everyone screws up.
Yes, it's life.
And so accepting a situation that went poorly and using it instead of a signal to not do it again, using it instead as this is a stepping stone toward getting better at it, right?
Yeah.
You can't improve on something without making a few mistakes. And the mistakes are a great learning opportunity to sort of understand what went wrong.
Yeah.
There's an after action in the military. There's something called an after action review.
Oh.
And the after action review, also called in medicine, it's called a post-mortem.
Oh.
And we use these in business in the same sort of way. The idea is after you've completed a project or after you've had an important sort of call, negotiation, whatever it is, if you're in medicine, in operation,
right?
You take a look at a very sort of objective, critical look at what just happened. And you do it in a context where there's no one there to criticize you, to judge you, right? So in the case of a hospital, it's only the surgeons there. You don't have the legal counsel there or anything like that. In the case of a business review, you don't have your boss in the room. It's just the people that were on that call.
So nobody who could evaluate you.
No one who's going to be evaluating you in a sort of critical way.
So no evaluation, apprehension, no need to
none
fear.
Of that. It's just the people who are involved in it. And so in this case, it would just be yourself.
Okay.
So you have that after action review with yourself and walk through it again. And even just by sort of going through it. So this is a little bit different than what you're saying. You're saying don't dwell on it. What I'm thinking might be helpful in the context of this after action review is you do dwell on it in the sense
like what went wrong
in a very objective way. So you're not thinking about the emotions you felt during it per se.
That could work.
You're instead thinking about sort of in a very sort of methodical, systematic way, what are the steps that I took that didn't go well?
Right.
And if I'm going to repeat this, how can I adjust those steps so that it goes better? So in a self-introduction, maybe the way that I conveyed my story wasn't as organized. Maybe I started with the wrong part of the story.
Right.
So this time around, I'm going to start with this part of the story. Or maybe I talked too long about this section of what I'm doing, and I saw that my listener was getting bored. So instead, next time, I'm going to use this other part and focus more on this, right? So just thinking through what you said in a very objective, analytical way.
Without judging yourself.
Zero judgment is a really powerful way to actually leverage your mistake as an opportunity to improve next time and have fun with it, right? Use it as a game. So each time you give a self-introduction, think of it as a game. Okay, I'm going to see how many points I can get on this self-introduction and make it a point of going out and introducing yourself to as many people as will listen to you, right? Yeah. Get goofy with it.
Practice it. Put yourself in as many situations where you're going to purposely seek out these situations that are going to make you feel uncomfortable, because that is how you're going
Totally.
to get past that. I think I really like your advice, Greg. I think that if you sort of maybe have a record of the speech, let's say like video footage, or maybe even an audio clip, or just really remember it really well, then I think your approach will work very, very well.
Yeah.
But I think other times, you know, let's say you go into an interview and you just like, you don't feel that great about it. You feel like you messed up, but you can't necessarily put your finger on what went wrong. Then I think trying not to dwell on it can be better, because you don't want to psych yourself out. You don't want to sort of like focus on that negativity, which could be perceived, right? But if you know that there's, you know, maybe you didn't express something the way that you would have liked to, then if you can point your finger on specific aspects of that communication event, let's say, then I think that would work really well. Yeah. So try out both and let us know, you know, how it goes.
By the way, I just want to make sure we're about to hit our time.
All right. Well, let's see. There's
Pursuing Peace is just congratulating us on our 300 subs. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much. That's so
I was
sweet.
at your first 100. Wow.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being on this journey with us. It's something that, you know, we feel really passionate about. So we're so happy that you're joining us for this and that you're subscribed and watching. It really makes us so happy. And thank you so much from the bottom of my heart.
Of course. And Anmol, thank you so much for your input too.
And Mal too. You guys are awesome.
It makes it a lot of fun for us. And that's the whole point of this, is to be interactive. And,
we want to,
to be chatting with you guys. And we'd love to hear your thoughts on this too. And, you know, sometimes we might not be able to get through everything that we're supposed to get through, but
send it, leave it in the comments below, and then we'll
address it in future videos.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I just want to leave us with a quote, because I think we're wrapping up, right? So Carl Jung, C.G. Jung, J-U-N-G, says, so he's a psychologist, right? Not psychologist, psychiatrist. Anyway.
It's a big name.
It's a big name. I just forget, because he talks a lot about dreams. Fella. He talks about dreams.
Yeah, I'm not sure what he
I just don't know what he identifies as, and also is in the past. So anyway, that was a long-winded way of introducing this quote. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. I love that. It's so nice. So basically, you know, just go out there, be yourself. The versions of yourselves might change, might grow, might evolve, because you're pushing yourself beyond your comfort zone. So I think that's the big takeaway from today. Yeah. And don't fear imposter syndrome.
And I guess the one thing I would leave you with is authenticity is about being sort of honest with yourself and honest with the people around you. And so to the extent that you are being transparent and open about who you are and the way you're feeling, you will be authentic. And the more sort of honest you are with yourself and with others, the more authentic you'll come across.
That's a really good takeaway.
All right. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you for joining us. Yeah. And we'll see you in another live. And then we have a lesson coming out this Thursday.
Yeah.
Which is how to remove communication barriers. So I hope that you check it out.
All right.
All right. Happy Explearning, everyone. Bye.